Hi everyone, I'm Bowsy, excited to bring you this forehand rubber ranking. Think of today as our year-end review, going back over every forehand rubber we've tested and ranking them on all-round performance. A top 10 countdown, counting up from 10 to 1, so you know how to choose a forehand rubber in the end. What makes a rubber a looping rubber? What makes a fast attack rubber, and which has the best all-round game? Once the list is done, you'll be able to see clearly which of these rubbers is right for you. Okay, enough talk, let's get into it. The top 10 countdown. This one is the peak of German rubber, one of the few that can take on Butterfly. 3 so far: ACC, AGR and ZGR. ACC and AGR are classic grippy rubbers. ZGR is tacky, and they go soft to hard in that order. Playing them, ACC feels fairly soft, which suits the backhand better. AGR gives you plenty of support, more than enough to hold up, and on the forehand it suits advanced players with solid fundamentals, looking at attack opening against topspin or backspin. AGR's ball quality beats most rubbers in its class. On attack it can match the very best. I called AGR the perfect firepower for the advanced player, so the attack is outstanding, brutal, and the defense is steady too. The downside, it's demanding to handle, hard to compress at low power, so flicks and short pushes take work. But with attacking power like that, if you love raw firepower, you'll love it. The Andro Rasanter R48 series is an old friend of this countdown, and the naming is refreshingly honest. The number is simply the sponge hardness. I picked R48 here because 48 degrees is the most balanced, the most all-round. Of course, if you really have power, you can go harder with R50 or even R53. Overall, with a modern cake sponge up to 2.3 mm, there's room for the sponge to deform and really grip the ball. Add a high-friction top sheet, and you get heavy spin. As the sponge springs back, it fires the ball out so nothing feels sluggish. Even with that thick sponge, the feel never turns vague. Comparing them, R48 manages to stay balanced overall, leaning towards attack. All round it's about 90% of TO5, though control and defense trail TO5. Andro still isn't a big name in China, but in Europe it's well known, respected, and these days it's winning plenty of recognition here too. It's ahead of AGR because it's the better all-round rubber. Koki Niwa has left international play, but he left a lot of unforgettable shots. While remembering him, let's remember the Victas he used. Niwa may be small and slight, but he's a top professional, and if he used V15 Extra that long, you can clearly trust the performance. Among forehand rubbers, V15 Extra isn't as wild as most. The sponge isn't soft by any means, but the feel is gentle and controllable, and just like the official marketing says, it doesn't take the incoming spin, so you can deal with the ball more freely. Low power, it ignores spin, and on contact, the sponge still grips the ball and produces outstanding spin. That's why the wrapping feel when you loop is so good, and the banana flick feels great too. With this rubber, Niwa wasn't strongest at mid too far, but his feel close to mid-table was better, which is where those trick shots came from. Niwa found the rubber that suited him. Overall, V15 Extra has excellent feel and very balanced performance. No standout feature and no obvious weakness. All round it's top tier and it works on either wing. The Tibhar K series pioneered tacky tensors and one of the more successful attempts. When K1 first came out, tacky non-Chinese rubber was still new, so it used a tacky top on cake sponge. And the second generation K to win with a hard, high-density sponge, moving closer to the hard tacky style, faster, higher quality. K2 Pro upgraded K2 with wider sponge cells and a new pimple structure, which gave K2 Pro that hard outside, soft inside. Hit hard and the catapult shows up with real power behind it. Harder hitting, higher quality. The new K3 in construction goes back to tacky topsheet, cake sponge, and the topsheet is tacky for a non-Chinese rubber. The small cell, hard cake sponge gives it real support. Overall it's firm but still very usable. The sense of speed is excellent and the feel stays clear. Attack and spin are both outstanding, there's a real biting feel. You grab the ball solidly and there's no obvious weakness. If it has a downside, it isn't as hard as DO9C or Orange National Hurricane and the sponge support is weaker. So this one wants to go on a hard or medium hard blade. Something around Viscaria hardness is fine. For the review I used a Tibhar Dynamic JC Darko Georgia Carbon. With ZLC, Super ZLC or an ALC blade, it feels great. On a softer all-wood blade it drops off. Top tire alongside 09C and K3 is now used by the Lebrun brothers, Matsudera's backhand, Georgic's forehand. It's a favorite forehand rubber for pros. Outside of China, only Dignics 09C is more popular. Broadly speaking, K2 Pro hits harder and attacks better but clearly gives up control. K3 is the more complete one, attack and control together in one rubber. If you don't want to boost and you don't want a rock-hard tacky one, K3 is well worth considering. K2 Pro is for lovers of hard tacky feel. The Tibhar Evolution series is clearly their flagship. Among top German rubbers or forehand rubbers anywhere in the world, it has earned its place. And within that series, MXP50, with more hardness than the standard MXP, stronger sponge support, more speed and more grip, has won even more fans. MXP50 may already be the backhand rubber of a Georgic, but for the average club player, it's more than enough on the forehand. Honestly, how many of us have a forehand at the level of Georgic's backhand? In our testing, MXP50 beat the field on top spin play and can go toe-to-toe with DO5. In forehand loops, the German speed advantage really showed, outperforming the rest. It keeps German speed and holds the ball. Tibhar's grippy topsheet gives him MXP50 insane grab on the ball and produce heavy spin. It isn't like the Japanese rubbers with their soft, unified feel. MXP gives a more direct attacking feel. It keeps that direct German attacking feel but improves the dwell. MXP50 is a definitive German rubber. In the review I said it, an outer fiber blade with MXP50 is wild. The sponge is very hard, so be honest when you pick a blade. If you've gone for a hard blade, this rubber risks being too much to drive. What MXP50 can do, puts it up against Butterfly's best, and it's a lot cheaper than Butterfly. Great value for money. Hurricane defined an era, the rubber that built DHS's reputation. At the Sydney Olympics, Wang Liqin and Yen Sen won doubles. On Hurricane 2 and Liu Guozheng on Hurricane 3 gave us that unforgettable match. At the 46th World Championships, Wang Liqin also won men's singles there. Overnight, pro and amateur alike in China all wanted the same weapon, DHS Hurricane. For most people, Hurricane started with Orange Commercial Hurricane. To meet every level of demand, DHS graded them by quality. Then came provincial and national versions. If Commercial Hurricane isn't enough now, Provincial Hurricane is the step up. Provincial and National both come in orange and blue sponge. Orange sponge is a bit crisper and without full power, it feels crisper still with faster ball release. It feels like a solid sponge pushes the ball straight out. And at low power, hard sponge and tacky top keep the catapult in check, so short pushes are more predictable and you can keep them tighter, but flat hitting trails a tensor. That's the line's clearest weakness compared with non-Chinese rubbers. To own the national team's forehand for this many years, National Hurricane has something special. Compared with orange sponge, blue sponge costs more and there's a reason for that. The feel is softer, it's more elastic and the dwell is better. But that spring needs more power to drive. If your power is limited, it'll feel mushy. So blue sponge suits solid fundamentals who can really generate power. If your fundamentals are good and you use a well-boosted blue sponge, attacking feels unstoppable. Nothing gets in your way. D09C had huge attention before launch, not just because it's Butterfly's flagship but because it's a hard tacky rubber. Showing how much Butterfly wanted in on the tacky forehand market. But once it arrived, people found Butterfly Tacky isn't DHS Tacky. 09C skips the traditional Hurricane-style tacky layer. The tackiness isn't strong so it can feel almost like a grippy rubber. But the grip beats a pure grippy sheet and the ball release never gets sluggish. It just adds a layer of stability. Compared to Hurricane, it's a lot springier. Impressively, the sponge is hard but in play it isn't hard to compress. Comparing them on the forehand, 09C's ball quality trails the softer DO5, so it's better to think of D09C as a more stable, tacky version of DO5 rather than Butterfly's Hurricane. In testing, the ball comes off faster than boosted Hurricane with more kick and a higher arc and a clearer feel. The short game isn't quite Hurricane level, but for a non-Chinese rubber the control is outstanding and the defense is aggressive. If you don't want to boost but you do want a tacky rubber, 09C is the first one to consider. At mid-distance, you can really feel that confidence-inspiring support. I've put it ahead of K3 because 09C's sponge support beats K3 and works with a wider range of blades. But because the sponge is hard, if your own fundamentals and stroke shape aren't great and your power is limited, this rubber may be tough to handle. The 09C is the most used non-Chinese tacky rubber in the world. Players you know, Bol, Ovcharov, Harimoto all use 09C forehand. If Provincial Hurricane isn't enough or you want the priciest in the line, then National Hurricane is the only answer. First thing to know, Provincial or National, they perform in the same direction. The differences are in the details. I mostly use Provincial in normal play, and only switch to National for matches. Two differences. First, psychological. At the big moments, National Hurricane gives extra confidence. You think, this is National Hurricane, there's no way it misses. No reason at all, so if the ball doesn't land, it must be me. Back to the physical, in transferring power, if you have a really high power ceiling, it's a bit higher than Provincial and only slightly. you won't obviously feel it. The other thing is better quality control. The sponge is far less likely to bubble. Long before DO5 arrived, Dynaryz already owned most non-Chinese backhands. The Dynaryz line is Butterfly's most successful series, has always been the most discussed rubber in the world. And which one gets talked about most on the forehand? It's TO5, best spin, highest ceiling. Then DO5 came along with more top-sheet grip than TO5, faster release, higher ceiling and a harder sponge, and the national team took to it fast. It's a bit like MXB and MXB50. Here in China, DO5 is a backhand rubber for players with monstrous power. But for most club players, DO5's hardness is fine on the forehand. Its spin matches a Chinese tacky rubber and the ball comes off faster. In topspin exchanges, it attacks harder than K3 or DO9C, and that's why DO5 sits ahead of DO9C. It's also more aggressive when you use your opponent's pace. I've used DO5 on an inner fiber blade, the W968, and an outer fiber's EJK, and you feel like you drive through it. At full power, it clearly wraps the ball, great at mid to far distance. The trade-off is a strong catapult. Control is improved over TO5 but still behind Tacky Hurricane and O9C. Put it on a blade that's too hard and it's hard to control, and it tests how well you handle gear. One more thing for club players, the Dignics top sheet wears better and the sponge is denser, which means it lasts you longer. And on attack it does more than O9C. So number 1 on this top 10 is up to you. There's no perfect 10 out of 10 rubber. Every rubber has strengths and weaknesses. We just have to judge those honestly, and the perfect setup is the one for you. The last spot is yours to fill. Let me know in the comments which forehand rubber deserves it. Thanks for watching.